Hello, and welcome to this episode of Such a Nightmare, Conversations About Horror. I am Katherine Troyer, and I'm so excited to once again be joined by Toni Tresca.
Hey there.
This is a podcast where the horrifically nerdy meets the terrifyingly academic, as we explore that fine line between the horrific and the horrible. Each episode looks at a specific horror text that is for better or worse, giving us nightmares.
And we are so excited to have you join us today for our conversation of 2023's Five Nights at Freddy's.
We talked briefly when we were picking this film about the fact that you have played the game much more than I have, because I think I tried it once, but you have like a whole, it's part of your childhood.
Definitely, moment. It's core memory for sure. Yeah, this is a rare instance too. Longtime listeners may know, Katie is definitely much more of a gamer than I am, and so this is actually kind of surprising.
I know, and we have to put me as a gamer in kind of quotes because I'm like a soft gamer. So if on the spectrum I'm at the highest end, then that just means that Toni, for you to have even ever played this game, I think actually kind of shocked me, which was exciting and new.
Yeah, so the video game was released back in 2014. So this was peak me being in high school marching band time. So when this came out on I guess it was iOS or whatever, we would everybody and their mom was downloading it on the band bus. And we were all shitting our pants late at night, on rides home from football games and whatnot, playing Five Nights at Freddy's. Most of the time, we would just all gather around one phone and kind of all watch the experience, kind of an early YouTube live watch along kind of thing. Yeah. It was really popular, particularly with this video game series, but we were kind of doing our own in the early days. And so I have a lot of very positive memories with this franchise. It was a lot of fun. It's very simplistic, which I think is why everybody in that moment was able to lean in and feel part of it and still get those jump scares that are so core to it. And I normally don't even like jump scares.
I know. And it is a game that is built on jump scares. I think where I knew that the story was returning me back to familiar ground was when you said marching band. And I was like, oh yes, this is making more sense. Although I don't think I realized you played an instrument. What did you play?
I played marimba. So for anybody who does, that's it's like a piano, but with big bars under it, and you hit it with mallets. So I actually was percussion section leader, and did a whole bunch of that. Ooh, probably fancy. Not surprising to anybody.
Yeah, I was going to say again, very not surprising. And I think it's worth beginning the conversation here because I think that this has been a film that has been desired for and longed for an incredible amount of time. It's also a film that, as you said, has come about because the games are so fan-based, right? You can't have an indie game like this that's successful as Five Nights is, and not have it be one that is 100% rabidly so supported by fans. So I have a little bit of stuff on the scholarship of the game. Not a ton because some of it I couldn't access. There was one person who wrote an entire thesis on it, and then so when you upload your thesis to the repository, you usually have an abstract, and there's just said, yes, this is a serious thesis that I truly wrote on this video games. Just stick with me. And I was like, that probably sums up the number of times that person had to have that conversation with their committee. So I have some scholarship on that, but let's start with as much or as little of a plot summary as you can give, because I'm not sure there's much of a plot to be had, but
And you're referring to the film here rather than the games?
I'm referring to the film because I have a lot of questions that you told me and promised me you could tell me about the games in terms of the extravagant back stories that have been crafted. So I definitely want to know about those because I have a lot of questions about how much of the film's plot about the Freddy part is accurate. But first, what is the film about for the few folks who haven't or may never watch this particular film?
Yes. So for those of you out there who are curious about the plot of Five Nights at Freddy's, it follows this kind of washed up mall security guard, Mike Schmidt, who is haunted by childhood trauma of losing his brother. And he is about to lose his sister unless he can get a job. And so he then goes back to this place, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where he was originally offered a job by this kind of sleazy owner played by Matthew Lillard, but he rejected it because he can't work nights. But now, because he needs a job, he's got to go back and he's gonna work nights. But this is no ordinary night shift. When this is kind of like deranged Chuck E. Cheese kind of vibe. With these like really creepy animatronics that for some reason this police officer whom Mike befriends, she really likes them. There's a really weird scene where she's like, look at, they're dancing. Isn't this the best thing in the world?
Yes. Yeah, she is the weirdest character, and not just through the twist.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure she makes sense, period. But yes, we definitely should talk about that.
We'll talk more about Vanessa in the meat of the episode. But these animatronics, though, they don't just dance. They also murder. They come to life at night, and they are attempting to kill. If they see you, they will kill you. And so pretty much the setup for it. Mike is trying to make sure that these guys don't get out and wreak havoc on the world, and these guys are intent on doing that. So that's kind of the general premise. No spoilers. I don't want to give away the twist for any of those.
Not people.
Yet. Yeah, not yet.
We will in about like 2 minutes, but yes.
Yeah, but in case anybody wants to pause it right now and go to Peacock and then stream this there, I'm giving them that option.
Excellent. Yeah, so it's a new enough film that no one's really written about it. I think there could be some really fascinating pieces of scholarship written about it in terms of adaptation, because one of the really important things about adapting from a video game to a film, and this is not the first and it won't be the last horror text that does this, is that, in horror video games, there's a huge amount of autonomy on you, the player, right? You're the one making decisions, and that's usually what's scary for people. In fact, that's why I think that horror video games are probably the scariest medium for me. Because especially the ones that are like Five Nights at Freddy, where it's truly more of a survivor mode, right? Where there's not, I tend to play games where I like just stand there and try to like kill, which means I probably wouldn't do well in a real battle because, you should duck behind things. But like, I'm not good at the like crafty, sneaky stuff. And that's of course the whole like premise of Five Nights at Freddy. And they start that first cold opening because, can't have a horror film that doesn't have a cold opening. That first cold opening teases this idea that we might have some really fun camera work, that we might have some really fun ways in which it's kind of giving us the illusion, at least, of trying to survive. I think that's quickly set aside, but there would be some interesting scholarship on that. There's not yet. So here is what's out there. There's some stuff on the video game, including there's a book on that's called Indie Games in the Digital Age. And one of the pieces is by Betsy Brey, and it's called 5 Nights at Fan Games, Feminism, Fan Labor, and 5 Nights at Freddy's. And so she talks about the fact that we can't even come close to ignoring the impact that YouTube had on the success of this game. YouTube and the fan culture is the reason that this game developed. And Cawthon, that's how I've chosen to say his last name, the guy who made it, Sean Cawthon, like he is 100% aware of that. And there's a line in here where Bray says, short of giving the fans some of his money, he does almost everything he can to make sure that they're involved, that they're included. And she uses a word I'd never seen before, but I thought was clever. And that's lovebur. So instead of labor, lovebur, and that idea of like labor that's made because you're so passionate and excited about stuff. And so she's talking a lot about just the impact the fan culture had on ensuring not just the success of the first game, but a universe, right, that has been created.
Absolutely. And Cawthorn is an absolutely fascinating figure, too, because he's a former guy who had been doing Christian video games.
Really?
I know. Isn't that insane? Yeah. So, and actually, fun fact, this Five Nights at Freddy's was actually based on one of his family-friendly games called Chipper and Sons Lumber Company.
That's so weird.
So the players, like, once they played it, there was this main character that's like this creepy, like, young beaver thing. People, like, families were like, this game is freaking us out. Critics were like, they called it unintentionally terrifying. And so in reaction to this negative response to the game, that's what actually led Cawthorn to use that feedback to make something really freaky and spooky that ultimately became Five Nights at Freddy's.
Excellent. That's really interesting. And I misspoke. His first name is Scott, not Sean. Yeah, so that's so interesting. Like now I just want to do a deeper dive, but it makes sense that a lot of the scholarship really is centering him, and we've talked before significantly on this show about my problems with the auteur theory, right? And sort of putting someone at the center of a universe. But I think in this case, we really can, center him because he in turn is making sure to sort of reach out to other folks. And the other scholarship that I found is actually, it's in a journal of Advances in Social Science, Education, and Humanities Research. It came out in 2022. The authors, their last names are Yujie and Zhao. And it was from a conference that happened in 2022. And they're talking about a brief analysis of the narrative. And they sort of end with saying the narrative of Five Nights at Freddy franchise is truly outstanding among all indie horror games. It has elaborately crafted clues sprinkled all over its games that require players to challenge themselves, to gain access to them, and decipher to come up with their own interpretation. Since some clues are too cryptic for only one player to decipher, fans from all over the world have set up a fandom to discuss the game's cryptic lore. And then they say a little bit later, the part covered in this paper is nothing but a tip of an iceberg among the whole meta universe. I haven't even started to discuss the book series that consists of short horror stories. And then, of course, this came out before the film. So they're acknowledging that this is, again, like kind of the tip of things. I think that that's, again, something I was expecting to see more of in this film. But even though there is a twist, as you alluded to, none of the events that happen feel appropriately reacted to. Like,
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and I'm not alone in noticing that. There was a piece by IGN and Polygon both have everyone has an article on it, and in IGN's piece they were talking about the fact that they were like, it doesn't make any sense how casually Mike is like, oh yeah, these are the ghost children who are operating that, and that's by Michael Kripe. Yep. And then in the Polygon episode
and that's
article,
the twist, by the way, is that like inside the animatronics are the souls of dead children who the owner, played by Matthew Lillard, who dresses up as these animatronics so they don't recognize him.
Yes.
He has been doing this to the children in this town for a long time, it seems like. Yeah. But somehow also the police never suspected to look. There's like,
at the owner.
Is it, 5?
Yeah.
There's like 5 kids who goes missing. There's 5 animatronics, and the police never once be like, I wonder if the bodies are.
Well, there are 5 animatronics, but one of them is the cupcake. Yeah. And Vanessa says no one could find the bodies because they're trapped in there, but I don't know what happened to the cupcake body because the cupcake. So there's some issues. And in the Polygon one, they talk about Hassinger says there's like a whole bunch of inconsistencies of like, how is Mike, who's being played by an actor who's 31, have a sibling who's somewhere between the ages of like 5 and 10, and also like, where is the dad? Because they explicitly say he's not dead, but he's just, so there's a lot of these weird, like, things that are just not bothered to explain. So tell me about the cupcake. Is it supposed to be bigger?
Cupcake is not a character from the games. They're just it's a companion to one of the characters. It's not, it's Chica, it's a companion to Chica. So I'm not really,
right.
There's no other further explanation in the game, which kind of makes more sense, but it makes way less sense in the movie.
So I don't know why they didn't just have 4 ghost kids, right? Because there are 4 big animatronics. Because they still Cupcake could have just kind of been like Chica's extension. I don't know. There were many questions that I had that just were either glossed over, ignored, or again, if we go back to the twist, like you said, like when all of these epiphanies are happening, there's a moment where Mike says to his sister, like, hey, so what's going on? What do you think's happening? And she's like, well, they're ghosts. And he's like, you think? And she's like, well, how else would they animate the electronics? And then it's like, okay, well, soup's done. Like, I don't know. It was just, everything was so anticlimactic, including the fact that he's like, I killed your brother.
Yeah.
Right. And it was still just like, okay, good to know now.
Because I think I maybe in my introduction downplayed the amount of times that we spend flashing back to Josh Hutcherson, who plays Mike, childhood trauma, where we just like relive the scene of his brother being kidnapped. So you're kind of expecting that, that might be like a big climatic moment, or it could be an opportunity to do something there. But yeah, when Matthew Lillard's character is like takes off the mask and just gives that whole speech, pretty much nothing.
Yes.
Giving us nothing.
Yes. Yeah. And the fact that, the brother isn't even an animatronic, like, Why isn't he a ghost kid? Like, I have so many questions.
Yeah.
So many questions. So is Vanessa, are any of the characters, the human characters in the video games, is this premise of like it's ghost children that have been murdered by a pedophile? Like, how much of the like just taken for grantedness of the narrative of the film is coming from the video game?
So this is kind of a combination of the first three games.
Okay.
So they take elements of it because the first game is you mentioned this in I guess the critical analysis that you pulled from. I kind of mentioned this, that they scatter the storytelling elements throughout the game. So the main storyline is pretty much almost always some variation on animatronics are coming to life and you need to make it to morning. So that's pretty much always the central conceit. You are playing with, you have like light switches usually, you've got different doors you can sometimes open, and you've got security cameras in most of them that you can kind of see them. That's pretty consistent throughout all of them. But story-wise, it's just little drops that get mentioned in each game. So like the ghost children element, actually, that comes from Five Nights at Freddy's 3. So that is in the end of that game, that's actually when they reveal that they're in the bad ending, because there's two endings to it. They kind of reveal that the bad ending, the murderous children are still haunting the animatronics. The good ending, you kind of free the children, but only until Five Nights at Freddy's 4 and the franchise continues, obviously. But this is kind of pulled from the first four. Mike is the security guard from the first game, so that's pretty accurate. Also,
with his whole backstory about
the brother thing,
his brother and stuff.
No, not really. Mike, he's just a security guard who is. You don't really get much information about him, honestly. He kind of just is. Initially, he's kind of snarky and not really caring, but by the end of the first game, he's kind of into it. But ironically, then he gets fired from his job for tampering with electronic, body odor, and general unprofessionalism.
Interesting. Okay, good to know.
Yes and no. There are elements of this murdered child that kind of get introduced in game 4, but to my knowledge, that's not super connected to Mike. Yeah. And so the cold opening is also kind of an allusion to the second game, in which it's revealed the twist of the second game is that it's actually, this has been happening for years before the events of the first game. And that's kind of what we get in the cold open there. And then, yes, the Matthew Lillard character who is playing kind of the owner, William Afton, that is pretty accurate. Also, his daughter, he does have a daughter in the game. So that is also accurate. Her role is much expanded, though, in this version.
Okay. So one of the things I really like about adaptation studies that kind of changed how I think about things, and much of this comes from Linda Hutchin, is that we have to remember that there may be a text that is chronologically first, but that may not be someone's first original text. Right? Like, so because I didn't play the games, for me, the film is the first text. Now, admittedly, that's not going to be the case for the vast majority of people who are clamoring to watch this game. On the other hand, they kept it at a PG-13 rating, despite the fact that probably by now, most of the people who played those original games are adults, and so they don't need that PG-13. So they are also hoping to like bring new life into it, so that for this may end up being the original text for an increasing number of people who then go play the games. But I think that that's where I find this film so odd, is that so much of the revelations are just like, oh, well, this isn't actually a revelation to you because you already knew this because you've read the lore, or you've read the games, or played the games, or you've read the stories. And that's the only explanation I can think of for why everything is just so anticlimactic and weirdly announced. Like, nothing feels causal, right? Like, everything is like, oh, by the way, yes, I am the daughter of the man who killed your brother. And yes, I have been like tricking you, and I knew that the ghost children were here, but it's not going to really impact our relationship in any significant way.
Yes.
You know, I'm still going to sometimes help you and sometimes not. Like, there was just a lot of really weird, I don't know, it felt liminal in a way that didn't feel intentional. If it had been intentional, it would have been awesome. Instead, it just felt timeless in a not good way, like in an accidental way.
I agree. And I think it's because they're kind of combining elements from like various games into this, and they're slightly changing things. Like when they first introduced like the guy's daughter, she is a baby, and it's called her name is Elizabeth, not Vanessa like it is in the film, and doesn't actually interact very much with like the security guard characters at all. But then by putting her in a situation, aging her up, and kind of putting this as like in the future where this events have already clearly happened. Uh,
Yes.
it kind of muddles things. It definitely does. And it also then leads to some really frustrating moments where the Vanessa character who's building this relationship with Mike also has all this key information that if she was actually building a true relationship, like you're saying, would have been revealing. Maybe we could have had a get out moment, like where it's like, oh, knew the whole thing the whole time. I'm actually evil. This is my dad. Sorry, family
Yeah.
first kind of thing. But we don't get that either. It's just like, it's
No.
totally fine that you didn't tell me that you knew who killed my brother.
Yes.
The central thing that you knew from the moment that I had been like using drugs to like induce myself and go to sleep to make myself dream and relive this moment on the hope. You're like, you think maybe you would have mentioned that?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that it would not have taken too much to either lean further into this idea of like that they're kind of caught in this neverland, right? Where like,
Mhm.
because there's so many allusions to that of like, the house isn't his house. It was clearly the parents' house, but it's still kept up nice, much nicer than you would expect. But if everything had kind of been like supporting this idea that he has been living, as has Vanessa, as has like everyone, that like once trauma hits, you can never not live in trauma land. Like if that had been the theme and really leaned into, that would have been great. Or if they would have gone the opposite route, like you said, and just been like, hey, we're going to build her a real rich backstory of like the fact that she was in on it. But instead, they just kind of like decided to see what would happen if they didn't pick a lane.
Yeah.
They're just kind of like driving down the road and it's not in a lane at all. And it just like makes it lackluster in some really like intentional feeling ways. And I think that's the part that's wild to me, is that like it doesn't feel like they even knew that they were missing opportunities. It feels like they felt like they made the right decision, but in truth, I don't think they made decisions.
For sure. And I would definitely want to give credit to director Emma Tammy here for the use of the animatronics and like kind of like
Yes.
that, the world building within there and the production design of the actual place. It all looks really good, but it's like what you're saying, it's super underutilized. Like the animatronics themselves. That's another example. They're this huge I mean, they are the game. And yet they kind of feel sidelined except for the few moments that they show up to do the jump scare. You're not really like, I also don't know if I could really. I mean, I because I played the games, I can kind of pick them apart, but we don't really get much time individually with the animatronics to appreciate them
No.
individually. They're mostly as a unit, or we see kind of the Freddy kind of coming there a little bit with Foxy, but like I just, when you have these like practical designs, which they are largely practical, I'm like, I
Yes.
wish they would have used them more, and we would have could maybe have spent a little bit less time with these kind of human characters, particularly if they're not going to give us that emotional depth.
Yes. Like having this whole additional story that took up not an insignificant amount of time
Hmm.
of the aunt, right? And how she wants, custody of the kid. And then there's like the teacher scene where I had a problem with the scene at the end with the daughter or with the sister, because I had thought the sister was neurodivergent, but suddenly they're like, she's all better. And so I was kind of upset because I thought that again, it felt like a missed opportunity. But I do want to say that you're absolutely correct that the fault does not lie on Emma Tammy. I think that it's actually, cinematically speaking, a
Hmm.
really pretty film. I think that the Freddy's is amazing. And I'm not sure we ever honestly needed to be anywhere else other than in Freddy's, because
Agreed.
there were entire rooms that were so cool. Like, why is the kitchen, like, I know it's supposed to be like a pizza joint, but the kitchen was weirdly big. Like, it felt, I don't know, and maybe that's just me, like, having flashbacks to The Shining, but it just feels like there are so many things we could have done in the space that was clearly beautifully built. And I just am not sure why you would choose to do that, particularly because, again, the game isn't going to take us out of Freddy's, right? Like, don't all the games happen exclusively?
No,
Okay, apparently
not
not.
all of them
Okay.
happen exclusively in Freddy's. There are some that happen in like there's Freddy's like theme park. There are some
Okay.
that happen like where the characters do like sometimes occasionally like they will show up in people's houses and like there are things. So like occasionally, yes, it goes outside of it, but by and large, yeah, we're pretty much in like a Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria.
Yeah, it just seems like we could have been there a lot more. Obviously, you're right. We spent an awful lot of time reliving that flashback, probably a little bit more than we needed. But I'm not even sure we needed the initial, like, yes, it builds a little character to understand that, you know, he's easily triggered by people that he thinks are being kidnapped when he's the mall cop. But like, we could have begun the film honestly with him sitting in Matthew Lillard's character's office waiting to get a job, right? Like, we could have, or even with him deciding to take the job. Like, I'm not sure that, again, there was much character development because everything just felt consequenceless.
And I mean, I have to imagine that some amount of this is from the production hell that this was put in. So pretty much immediately after the game was released, Warner Brothers snapped up the rights to it in around 2015. They were pretty intent on making a movie, but it was going to be very, 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 very different. So it was going to be by Roy Lee, David Katzenberg, Seth Grahame-Smith, so much more of kind of like a, I don't know, more of a dude bro kind of vibe, gonna be honest. That's kind of like Seth Grahame-Smith is, for people who don't recognize that name, he's the author of all those like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer kind of things.
Oh,
so
yeah.
like,
okay, yeah.
That's kind of the vibe that they were going with. But then it kind of the rights got transferred over to Jason Blum's Blumhouse Productions in around 2017. And they initially hired, and this was wild to me, Chris Columbus to direct and co-write the film, which was pretty wild given his background. I was like, because he's the guy who's like most known for like Adventures in Babysitting and Home Alone, Mrs. Doubtfire. So you're like,
which in retrospect, rewatching particularly Home Alone, like he has a knack for body trauma, right?
That's actually a good point.
And Adventures in Babysitting also has some like really lovely gritty elements. So I think he could have done it, but it would have been a very weird film. Yeah. A very weird one.
So he was brought on. The film is like kind of like, it's will they, won't they? Every time Jason Blum would get asked about it by the press, he would be like, oh yeah, we're really excited. Definitely still happening. Still coming. Christopher Columbus then leaves the project. And in October of 2022, which you'll be like, that's a year before the film came out, and that would be accurate. That is when Emma Tammi stepped into the project she took over as director and also as a co-screenwriter, along with Scott Cawthon, who is the original game writer, and then Seth Cuddleback. So I can imagine that the story problems that we're mentioning definitely come from that. And so that's a wild production process.
And do you know, I don't know much about Tammi, in part because, you know, she doesn't have a super long filmography yet. She has directed stuff. This wasn't her first thing, but none of it is, this is her first like big film, really.
This is her blockbuster. This is her breakout. Sure.
So do you have any knowledge of like why Tammi would have been attached to the project or how she got attached to the project?
She's a really big fan of it. And she honestly, she has like a really intense love of the lore. And kind of, she comes from that background. And she honestly was like, I think, so I'm not 100% sure the specifics of how she landed that job. Emma Tammi, if you want to come on the podcast and correct the record, you are more than welcome to. You are always welcome. But yeah, so she's kind of just has a lot of respect for this franchise. She gave this really great interview with The Wrap, where she talks about how collaborating with the game's creator was essential because it just loves the encyclopedia knowledge of the lore. So like, she loves this franchise, and so she has been teasing that she wants to do more with it. And so I'd honestly love to see what an Emma Tammi fully led Five Nights at Freddy's vision would look like, because I wouldn't be surprised if later down the line we learned that a lot of the stuff that a lot of these story problems were handed to her from previous production that was already in development. And she said that she wants to do, if there are sequels, she would like to do them as interestingly kind of like based on the games. And so the second one, if that is true, it's actually the prequel, like I had mentioned earlier on, and it is set not at Five Nights at Freddy's, the Pizzeria, but at this like off-site theme park. So I'd honestly be interested in maybe seeing that.
Yeah, so I want to say that I am a big fan of many of the decisions that Jason Blumhouse makes in terms of, first, you can tell he's like living his best life, right? Like he is having such a good time living his best life. And I feel like he is so willing to take a gamble, right? Like it is a gamble to choose a director that's not really done very much for a big project like this. And it is also just in our Hollywood world, a gamble to take on a female director. Obviously, Get Out was a huge gamble that paid off immensely. And a lot of his film projects, you can tell, are just like, I'm still having fun with this franchise. I sure hope you are too. And I'm very respectful of those decisions. I do grow frustrated with the fact that, if it's a Blumhouse film, it is almost inevitably going to be affirmative horror, right? And very, very explicitly so, with Get Out being probably the only major exception. I recently watched Insidious Red Door, or whatever the last one is in the franchise. And again, it was like as hopeful and happy as it could be. But if Tammy could come in and sort of make Five Nights at Freddy 2 more match some of her indie films that she's written and directed, I think that would be really intriguing. And still, I think up Blumhouse's alley, but it would just be less Blumhousey.
I agree. Yeah. And I actually want to just quickly correct the record. I'm getting the game. I got the games mixed up. The second one is more similar to the first one. It is still set at the Freddy's.
Okay.
So I'll still say what I said in that I would like to see Emma Tammy's version, but it is not quite the theme park. That is a later spinoff.
Okay.
I got that mixed up. There's a lot of lore to keep straight.
There is a lot of lore to keep straight. And I think that's also what I would like to see, right? Like if she knows this world, this universe as well as she says she does, I would really like to see it dig a little bit deeper. And I know that a lot of my issues with the film do come from the fact that it's affirmative. Like the creepiest characters are going to prove out to be, innocent little ghost children. It's hard to be scared of the animatronics the moment you realize they're ghost children. And the moment they're not going to be evil ghost children. Matthew Lillard, as always, plays a character who manages to be psychotic, but not necessarily scary. I've never found him, even going back to Scream, particularly scary. He's just over the top, which is what he does best. So there was so little that was scary about this film. Again, in part because everyone was like, oh, ghost children? Sure. Oh, your dad is the pedophile that killed my brother? Sure. I don't know. I'm even when the little sister is leaving the house with Freddy and Freddy's like, Aunt so-and-so so silly. She's taking a nap. And the little girl who's 10 or 12 is like, okay. There was just so many moments that were stripped of the scariness, right? They were rendered unscary and in really intriguing ways. And I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, I've got to agree. I didn't particularly find this film scary. And I one of the things that I was interested in, you just answered my question. I was going to ask you is if you considered it a really horror. And I guess it is in the sense that there is these villains.
Is it?
I guess loosely, if your only qualification is there is something spooky and there is some trauma related to it and there are jump scares. I guess it has all those elements.
Were there jump scares?
I think they were attempted jump scares, but
okay.
Unlike the video game, in which I think one thing I do want to call out is I was not impressed with the sound design of this film. And I think I only maybe say that because I am so impressed with the sound design from the original games, is that so much of the original games is about listening to the footsteps or the breathing of these things. And some games don't even have security cameras. So that's all you get is this auditory escape. It's mostly darkness. Yes. And then these creatures will pop out of you with this loud burst. And it's terrifying. And I cannot say that the film captured that aspect of the game.
Almost every semester, I have some student ask me at some point what the difference is between a thriller and a horror film. And I've never quite been able to articulate it very well. But this semester, I actually had a student provide a really lovely definition. And that is, she said that a thriller wants you to keep watching because they want you to see, you're on the edge of your seat about what's going to happen. Whereas a horror film wants you to want to look away, right? It's too hard to look at what you're seeing. And I'm not sure, honestly, that Five Nights at Freddy was either a thriller or horror by that definition, because I'm not sure the lack of any conflict made it hard for it to be a thriller, but also the lack of any consequence made it hard for it to be a horror film, because it is a terrifying game. That much I know. I tried playing about 5 minutes, but I was playing on a device that was set extra dark, so I couldn't see the already dark game, and I didn't have the sound set right. So I quickly gave up after 5, maybe 10 minutes after I had died twice, and I realized this was not the game to pick up casually right then. But like, it is a terrifying game, this idea of like survival, and none of that, not a single part of that was carried over into this. The people who died deserve to die. Even the aunt, deserves to quote die because she's trying to take the family away. Like
Yeah.
no one's, it's okay that we don't need to have gruesome deaths, but we should have at least jump scares
So
or at
yeah.
least something.
And I think just maybe that some of that is from the shift in POV. Like so much of the games is like told really much you are the POV of
Yes.
the security guard who or whomever is experiencing that. And so yeah, I think that there is just some like tension there that comes from like when they're trying to flesh out this game and world. When honestly, I think they had maybe just done a more straightforward adaptation where you are just following this security guard on like the 5 nights that he's working there, and he is trying urgently to not get murdered. That's a
And you
that's
could
a
still
premise I
have
want
it
to
be a
see.
PG-13. Yeah, you could still have it be PG-13 because PG-13 is really based more on what we see on the screen versus what traumatizes us between spaces. And there are moments where Tammy shows us how terrifying that could be. So the scene where the sister is sleeping in her little fort, and we have a POV camera of one of the animatronics or the ghost, and the door opens and it kind of like floats over to her. There are these moments that show us that it's clearly not an issue of cinematography and directing. It's clearly just, again, this like attempt to build these backstories that would only matter if they mattered, but they clearly don't. Again, because we're in this liminal space where there are no consequences. Time is meaningless, except we're going to keep being reminded of the past. I don't know. It was so much potential, but it also wasn't bad. It just wasn't good.
No, I feel it was just so. I'm gonna use some Gen Z slang here. Mid. I was so mid. The whole
Ew.
time I just couldn't be. I couldn't help but being like, it's not like it's not offensive. It's not. I'm not like angry even that I watched this, but it's so forgettable for a game that is so, for me at least, unforgettable. Which I think it's just disappointing, and I'd really like them to take another crack at it actually. And you know what? They may actually get a chance to do that because this in a
Really?
year of box office bombs and Hollywood's on fire. Five Nights at Freddy's is a rare success for the industry. So it opened, its domestic opening was $80 million, which is very, very good for a horror film. And it's also proved to have legs. It's become the highest grossing film of 2023, surpassing Scream 6 and Megan from earlier this year.
Well, it's the highest grossing horror film, right? Not film
Oh,
at
did I
all.
say
Total,
film?
right?
Excuse me.
Yes.
Highest grossing
Okay.
horror film of 2023, passing Scream 6 and Megan. And then it's also Blumhouse's highest grossing film that the studio has produced, period.
Which is wild to me. Absolutely wild to me. Because they do have some other really big films in their filmography. So hopefully it could have, it would be great if this could become, I mean, it might even be good as a mini series. I'm not sure that it has to be locked into a film. I think that I have been finding that the best horror adaptations, now most of them are by Mike Flanagan, right? But a lot of them have been these mini series. And I still maintain that despite the CGI, the Shining TV made for TV series is like one of my favorites. So like, I think there's things that could happen that would be more exciting if we could have a little bit more space to do it. And I want to keep Tammy on. I want it to like either be more surreal, lean either more into that, or like have the backstory matter. And Vanessa's in a coma, so she may or may not wake up. And of course, Matthew Lillard's character is clearly, I mean, he says, "I always come back," which is both true for Lillard and for the characters. So like, there is room. They just have to make some decisions and stick to them.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think there are a lot of like weird little elements in here too that I enjoyed, and I think that probably come from Tammy's love. Is like there's a weird amount of like YouTube cameos in here, like Five Nights at Freddy's content creators who make like weird
Yeah.
little cameos. The Five Nights at Freddy's song that you hear at the end that I've not been able to get out of my head is actually that's a fan song that was made by
That's
the
cool.
Israeli American band Living Tombstone. So yeah, it was released as a single back in 2014 because they just love the game so much, and it's kind of just become Jack Black did a TikTok with it that blew up, and it's just become like this really viral thing. And it's really core to like the fans and the lore, and the fact that's included is it was a nice touch too. Like those little moments in there that really do make me want to give them another crack at it.
As always, we would love to hear your thoughts on this film. We are aware that it was pretty well received by a lot of fans, not so much, of course, by the critics, but that there's a pretty positive fan response to it. And we would love to know what you appreciated, what you would want to see in a sequel or a requel or whatever they ended up doing to kind of continue breathing new life into this. You can, of course...
It kind of works perfectly, honestly, if they want to do what Emma Tammy said and just do a straight adaptation of the second one, because it is a prequel, so they could just ignore everything.
See, that'd be perfect. And again, it's not that the actors were bad, it's just that there was lots of missed opportunities that could easily be rectified. So you can reach out to us. All of our information is in our episodes. Of course, we want to say thank you to Jackson because Jackson makes it sound like we don't occasionally pause and have to Google things. So thank you so much, Jackson.
Thank you so much, Jackson.
So exciting news, because we'll tell you what our next couple of episodes are, because our next episode is the end of a journey. Toni, what is up next for us?
Yeah, we're going to be wrapping up the Friday the 13th franchise. So we're going to do a little bit of a post-mortem on the Freddy v. Jason in light of the rest of the Friday the 13th genre and franchise that we've now unpacked. And then we're also going to be looking more extensively for our full episode at the 2009 remake.
Very exciting. And of course, eventually we'll have to, if the show ever gets released, we'll have to see what Crystal Lake is like, which is also supposed to be Peacock, I think, because Peacock's kind of stepping up their game. But for now, we are almost done after a really long time. So we're going to do that. But then we thought that after that, we would sort of keep to this theme of creepy animatronics. And so the film after our last Friday the 13th is going to be what?
We're going to be talking about the Nick Cage film Willy's Wonderland that came out in 2021. And so it's kind of a similar-ish premise with these animatronics that come to life at this abandoned family entertainment center. I've heard it's got more of a comedic edge to it, and it's honestly supposed to be a little bit more violent and intense. So I am really excited to check that one out.
Yeah, me too. Thank you to all of you for continuing to listen to our nightmares.
And have a spooktacular day.